Sometimes the most broken people find healing in the most unexpected places. In the dusty plains of Montana, where endless skies meet rolling hills, a chance encounter between a woman who had given up on herself and a rancher who saw worth where others saw none would prove that love doesn't always arrive as we expect it to. This is the true story of Sarah Matthews, a woman whose spirit had been crushed by years of abuse and abandonment, and Jake Harrison, a weathered rancher who believed that everyone deserved a second chance at happiness. It's a story about discovering that sometimes our greatest strength comes from our deepest wounds, and that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person who refuses to let you believe you're worthless. What happens when someone who has lost all hope meets someone who specializes in fixing broken things? What unfolds is a journey of healing, trust, and the kind of love that doesn't just change two people. It transforms an entire community's understanding of what it means to see the worth in another human being. Sarah Matthews sat on the concrete barrier beside Highway 89, her thin frame hunched against the Montana wind that cut through her worn jacket like it was made of paper. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow and green, but the emptiness in her eyes remained as dark as the storm clouds gathering overhead. She clutched a crumpled $20 bill in her palm, the last of her money after 3 days of hitchhiking from nowhere to nowhere. The divorce papers in her backpack were signed and filed. The restraining order against Marcus was supposed to protect her, but paper couldn't heal the damage he'd done to her soul over 8 years of marriage. Every morning she'd wake up expecting his fist. Every evening she'd flinch at sudden sounds, and every night she'd whisper to the darkness that she was worth nothing, just like he'd always told her. Cars rushed past without slowing down. She didn't blame them. Who would want to pick up a 32-year-old woman who looked like life had chewed her up and spit her out? Her brown hair hung limp and unwashed. Her clothes were rumpled from sleeping in bus stations, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who had stopped believing in tomorrow. The first drops of rain began to fall, each one hitting the hot asphalt with a sharp hiss. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter and wondered if she should just start walking again. Walking had become her way of thinking, of forgetting, of trying to outrun the voice in her head that sounded exactly like Marcus telling her she was stupid, worthless, and lucky anyone would even look at her. She had been walking for 3 days since the bus dropped her off in Great Falls. The women's shelter there had been full, and the social worker had given her a list of other towns, other shelters, other maybes. Sarah had looked at that list and felt the familiar weight of hopelessness settle on her chest like a stone. More waiting rooms, more forms to fill out, more people asking her what she planned to do with her life when she could barely figure out how to get through the next hour. A pickup truck appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the growing gloom. Sarah stood up slowly, her muscles stiff from sitting on the cold concrete, and raised her thumb. She had learned not to hope anymore. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, like new clothes or a warm meal or believing that someone might actually want her around. The truck slowed down, and Sarah felt her heart skip. The driver was a man, and every instinct screamed at her to run. But where could she go? The nearest town was 15 miles behind her, and the next one was 20 miles ahead. She was trapped between destinations, suspended in the space between her old life and whatever came next. The truck pulled over, gravel crunching under its tires. Through the rain-spattered windshield, Sarah could see the silhouette of the driver. He was wearing a cowboy hat, and his hands rested easily on the steering wheel. He didn't honk or yell at her to hurry up. He just waited, the engine idling softly. Sarah approached the passenger side cautiously, her hand trembling as she reached for the door handle. The window rolled down, and she found herself looking into the kindest eyes she had ever seen. They were blue-gray, like the sky before a snowstorm, and they held no judgment, no irritation, no calculation of what he might get from helping her. "You look like you could use a ride," the man said. His voice was quiet, steady, with the kind of accent that came from generations of living on the land. "I am Jake Harrison. I've got a ranch about 10 miles up the road." Sarah hesitated. She had sworn she would never trust another man, never put herself in a position where someone could hurt her again. But the rain was falling harder now, and she was so tired of being afraid, so tired of running, so tired of everything. "I don't have much money," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain on the truck's roof. "Didn't ask for money," Jake replied. "Asked if you needed a ride." Something in his tone, in the way he didn't demand an explanation or make her feel like she owed him something before he'd even helped her, made Sarah's defenses crack just a little. She opened the door and climbed into the truck, her wet clothes immediately soaking the seat. "Sorry," she mumbled, trying to make herself as small as possible. "Don't worry about it," Jake said, reaching behind his seat and pulling out a thermos. "Coffee's still warm if you want some." Sarah accepted the cup with shaking hands, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it was the first hot thing she'd had in 2 days. She sipped it carefully, afraid that if she drank too fast, she might cry from the simple kindness of it. Jake put the truck in drive and pulled back on a highway. The radio played soft country music, and the heater began to chase away the chill that had settled in Sarah's bones. For the first time in months, she felt almost safe. "You running from something or towards something?" Jake asked after a few minutes of comfortable silence. Sarah considered lying. She had gotten good at making up stories about herself, at creating versions of her life that didn't include broken ribs and black eyes, and nights spent hiding in closets while Marcus raged through the house looking for something to break. But looking at Jake's profile in the dashboard light, at the calm way he drove through the storm, she found herself telling the truth. "Both," she said, "or maybe neither. I don't really know anymore." Jake nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. Sometimes the hardest part is figuring out which direction to go when you're not sure where you want to end up. They drove through the rain in silence, the windshield wipers keeping steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Sarah found herself relaxing despite her better judgment, lulled by the warmth and the sound of the engine and the strange comfort of being next to someone who didn't seem to want anything from her except maybe a little conversation. The ranch appeared suddenly, its lights glowing through the rain like a lighthouse. Jake turned into the gravel driveway, and Sarah could make out the shapes of buildings through the darkness. A house, a barn, several outbuildings that looked solid and well-maintained. Everything about the place spoke of permanence, of roots that went deep into the earth. "You can stay the night if you want," Jake said as he parked near the house. "Guest room's got clean sheets, and I could probably rustle up some dinner." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She had learned to be suspicious of kindness, to look for the hidden price that always seemed to come attached to help from strangers. But she was so tired, so cold, so tired of sleeping in bus stations and truck stops and the occasional doorway when nowhere else was available. "I can't pay you," she said. "Didn't ask you to," Jake replied. "Sometimes folks just need a place to rest up before they figure out what comes next." He got out of the truck and came around to her side, opening the door and offering his hand to help her down. Sarah looked at that hand for a long moment, at the calluses that spoke of honest work and the gentle way he held it out to her, not demanding she take it, but making it clear the offer was there. She took his hand, and for the first time in years, a man's touch didn't make her want to run. The house was everything the outside had promised. It was clean but lived in, comfortable without being fancy. The kitchen smelled like coffee and fresh bread, and there were photographs on the walls of horses and cattle and wide open spaces that seemed to go on forever. "Bathroom's down the hall if you want to clean up," Jake said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "I'll see what I can find for dinner." Sarah nodded and made her way down the hall, her footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. The bathroom was simple but spotless, with fluffy towels and soap that smelled like lavender. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and winced. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, thin and hollow-eyed and haunted. She washed her face and hands, trying to scrub away the grime of 3 days on the road. The warm water felt like a luxury, and she found herself crying quietly, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of being offered a place to wash up a hot meal, a bed for the night. When she returned to the kitchen, Jake had set the table with 2 plates and was ladling soup from a pot on the stove. The smell made her stomach growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. "Vegetable soup," he said without looking up. "Nothing fancy, but it'll warm you up." They ate in comfortable silence, the storm raging outside while they sat in the warm circle of light cast by the kitchen lamp. Sarah tried to eat slowly to make the soup last, but she was so hungry that she finished her bowl before Jake was halfway through his. "More?" he asked, and when she nodded, he filled her bowl again without comment. After dinner, Jake showed her to the guest room. It was small but cozy, with a quilt on the bed that looked handmade and a window that would show the mountains in the morning. There was a dresser with a mirror, a comfortable chair, and a small bookshelf filled with well-read novels. "I put some clothes on the bed," Jake said, pointing to a neat stack of women's clothing. "They belong to my sister. She's about your size, I think. Bathroom's right across the hall." Sarah stared at the clothes, her throat tight with emotion. "I can't take these. They're just sitting in storage," Jake said. "Might as well be useful." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Sarah picked up the top item from the stack. It was a soft blue sweater, the kind she hadn't owned in years. Marcus had controlled every penny they spent, and new clothes had been a luxury he decided she didn't deserve. She changed into clean clothes, marveling at how good it felt to wear something that fit properly, that didn't smell like bus stations or fear. The sweater was warm and soft against her skin, and the jeans fit perfectly. For the first time in months, she looked in the mirror and saw a glimpse of the woman she used to be, before Marcus convinced her she was nothing. That night, as she lay in the comfortable bed listening to the rain on the roof, Sarah allowed herself to think about what Jake had said. Sometimes folks just need a place to rest up before they figure out what comes next. She had been running for so long that she had forgotten it was possible to stop, to breathe, to think about what she actually wanted from life instead of just trying to survive it. She pulled the quilt up to her chin and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without checking to make sure the door was locked, without listening for footsteps in the hallway, without the tight knot of fear in her chest that had become as familiar as breathing. In the morning, she would have to make decisions about where to go and what to do next. But tonight she was warm and safe and fed, and that was enough. More than enough. It was the beginning of remembering that she might be worth something after all. Sarah woke to the sound of birds singing and sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, panic seized her chest as she tried to remember where she was, her body tense for flight. Then she remembered the storm, the truck, Jake Harrison offering her soup, and kindness without asking for anything in return. She lay still for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the ranch waking up. She could hear the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of barn doors opening, and the soft murmur of Jake's voice as he talked to his animals. The sounds were peaceful, purposeful, nothing like the chaos and anger that had filled her life for so long. When she finally got up and looked out the window, she gasped. The storm had cleared overnight, leaving behind a world that sparkled with raindrops and morning light. The ranch spread out before her in all directions, green pastures dotted with cattle, mountains rising in the distance like purple guardians. She had never seen anything so beautiful, so vast, so far removed from the cramped apartment where she had spent 8 years walking on eggshells. She dressed quickly in the clothes Jake had left for her, running her hands over the soft fabric of the sweater. When was the last time she had worn something that made her feel pretty? Marcus had always criticized her appearance, telling her she was too fat or too thin, too pale or too made up, until she had stopped trying to look nice at all. The kitchen was empty when she came downstairs, but there was a pot of coffee on the stove and a note propped against a sugar bowl. "Help yourself to breakfast." Back around noon, Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and explored the kitchen, marveling at the simple abundance of it all. The refrigerator was well stocked with fresh food, the pantry filled with canned goods and staples. After years of scraping together meals from whatever Marcus allowed her to buy, the sight of all that food made her feel dizzy with possibility. She made herself toast and eggs, eating slowly while she watched the world outside the window. A red-winged blackbird perched on the fence post, singing its heart out to the morning sky. In the distance, she could see Jake moving among the cattle, his dogs running beside him as he checked water troughs and mended fences. After breakfast, Sarah washed her dishes and wandered outside. The air was fresh and clean, washed by the storm and scented with grass and wildflowers. She had grown up in the city and had never experienced such overwhelming quiet, broken only by natural sounds that seemed to ease something tight in her chest. She found herself walking toward the barn, drawn by curiosity and the simple pleasure of being able to go where she wanted without asking permission. Inside, the barn was dim and sweet-smelling, filled with the rustle of hay and the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls. A chestnut mare poked her head over a stall door and nickered softly. Sarah approached cautiously, her hand extended. The horse sniffed her palm and then allowed Sarah to stroke her neck, the warmth of her coat soft against Sarah's fingers. "That's Molly," a voice said behind her. Sarah spun around, her heart hammering with automatic fear, but it was only Jake, standing in the doorway with a gentle smile. She's always been friendly with strangers. Good judge of character. Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have wandered off. I was just exploring," Jake finished. "Nothing wrong with that. This is your space as much as mine while you're here. Your space." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had told her she belonged somewhere, that she had the right to explore and be curious and take up space in the world? Jake moved past her to check on the other horses, his movements calm and deliberate. He talked to each animal as he worked, his voice low and soothing. Sarah found herself relaxing as she watched him, struck by the gentleness in his big hands as he stroked a gelding's nose or adjusted a halter. "Do you ride?" he asked, glancing over at her. "I used to," Sarah said. "When I was little, my grandmother had horses. But that was a long time ago." "Like riding a bike," Jake said. "You never really forget." They worked together in comfortable silence, Jake showing her how to fill water buckets and measure out grain. Sarah found herself absorbed in the simple, rhythmic tasks, her mind quieter than it had been in years. There was something healing about caring for the animals, about being useful in a way that had nothing to do with walking on eggshells or anticipating someone else's moods. When they finished with the horses, Jake suggested they check on the cattle. They climbed into his truck and drove out into the pasture, the vehicle bouncing over the rough terrain. Sarah gripped the door handle at first, then gradually relaxed as she realized Jake was a careful driver who knew every rut and rock on his land. The cattle were scattered across the hillside, black dots against the green grass. Jake parked near a water tank and got out to check the pump mechanism. Sarah stayed in the truck at first, content to watch him work, but eventually her curiosity got the better of her, and she climbed out to join him. "What exactly do you do out here?" she asked. "I mean, day to day?" Jake straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Depends on the season. Right now it's mostly maintaining fences, checking on the herd, making sure everyone has food and water. In the fall we'll round them up for market. Spring is calving season, which keeps me busy around the clock." "It sounds like a lot of work." "It is," Jake agreed. "But it's good work. Honest work. There's something to be said for spending your days outside, for knowing that what you do matters." Sarah nodded, though she couldn't quite imagine what it would feel like to wake up each morning with a sense of purpose, to know that your work had meaning beyond just surviving until the next day. They spent the morning driving around the ranch, Jake pointing out landmarks and explaining the rhythms of ranch life. Sarah found herself asking questions, her natural curiosity emerging for the first time in years. What did he do in the winter? How many cattle did he run? Had he always lived here? Jake answered patiently, seeming genuinely pleased by her interest. Yes, he had grown up on this ranch. His father had built the original house in the 1940s, and Jake had taken over when his parents retired to Arizona. He ran about 300 head of cattle, mostly Black Angus, and Yes, the winters were brutal but beautiful in their own way. What about your sister? Sarah asked, remembering the clothes he had given her. The one whose clothes I'm wearing? Jake's expression grew thoughtful. Emma. She moved to Denver about 5 years ago. Got tired of the isolation out here, wanted city life. She comes back for visits, but she's got her own life now. There was something in his tone that suggested loneliness, though he didn't complain about it. Sarah wondered what it would be like to live in this vast, beautiful place all alone, with only the animals for company most of the time. When they returned to the house for lunch, Jake made sandwiches while Sarah set the table. It struck her how easy it felt, this simple domestic routine, with someone who didn't criticize every move she made or find fault with the way she buttered the bread or arranged the napkins. I should probably be moving on, Sarah said as they ate. The words tasted like ashes in her mouth, but she had learned not to outstay her welcome, not to assume that kindness would last beyond the minimum decent interval. Jake looked up from his sandwich, his blue-gray eyes studying her face. Where are you headed? Sarah realized she didn't have an answer. She had been running for so long that she had forgotten to think about where she was running to. I don't know, she admitted. Somewhere. Anywhere. That's not much of a plan. I don't have much of a plan, Sarah said, and was surprised to hear herself laugh. It was a rusty sound, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years, but it was real. Jake smiled at the sound. Well, you're welcome to stay another night. Or two. Or however long you need to figure things out. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. You don't even know me. I could be anyone. I could be dangerous. Could be. Jake agreed mildly. But I doubt it. And besides, I'm a pretty good judge of people. Comes from working with animals all my life. They don't lie about who they are. That afternoon, Jake had to drive into town for supplies, and he asked if Sarah wanted to come along. Her first instinct was to refuse, to hide in the safety of the ranch until he returned, but something made her nod yes. Clearwater was the kind of small town Sarah had only seen in movies, with a main street lined with family-owned businesses and everyone seeming to know everyone else. Jake parked in front of the hardware store, and Sarah noticed how people waved and called out greetings as he walked down the sidewalk. Jake, how's the new calf doing? An elderly man called from the steps of the post office. Growing like a weed, Tom. Thanks for asking. Jake Harrison, you're just the man I wanted to see, said a woman in a flour-dusted apron who emerged from the bakery. My fence gate is giving me trouble again. I'll swing by tomorrow, Mrs. Patterson. Sarah watched these interactions with fascination. In the city, she had been invisible, just another face in the crowd. Marcus had made sure of that, isolating her from friends and family until she had no connections left except him. But here, Jake was woven into the fabric of the community, and people clearly respected and relied on him. At the hardware store, Jake introduced her simply as Sarah, a friend who's visiting. No one asked probing questions or stared at the fading bruises on her face, though she caught a few curious glances. The store owner, a weatherman named Bill, was friendly without being intrusive, and his wife offered Sarah a cup of coffee and a homemade cookie while Jake gathered his supplies. Jake's good people, Mrs. Bill said as they watched Jake load fence posts into his truck. Lost his father young, took over the ranch when most boys his age were still figuring out what they wanted to do with their lives. Never heard him complain about it, though. Sarah found herself studying Jake with new eyes. She had assumed he was older than her, but now she realized he might actually be younger. There was something about his steady competence that made him seem mature beyond his years. On the drive back to the ranch, Sarah found herself thinking about what it would be like to belong somewhere the way Jake belonged to Clearwater. To have people who knew your name, who cared about your sick animals, and called out greetings when they saw you on the street. It seemed like the most precious thing in the world, that sense of being rooted, of having a place where you mattered. That evening, after they had finished the chores and eaten dinner, Jake suggested they sit on the porch and watch the sunset. Sarah had never been one for sitting still, but there was something about the vastness of the sky and the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling in for the night that made stillness seem not just possible, but necessary. I've never seen so many stars, Sarah said as darkness fell, and The sky erupted in pinpricks of light. City living spoils you for that, Jake said. Out here, you remember how small we all are in the grand scheme of things. It's humbling. They sat in comfortable silence, the night air cool against their faces. Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years, her body finally, releasing the tension that had become so constant she had forgotten it was there. Can I ask you something? Jake said eventually. Sarah tensed automatically. Okay. What made you decide to start over? The question was so gentle, so free of judgment, that Sarah found herself answering honestly. I didn't decide. It was decided for me. My ex-husband, he made it clear that I wasn't welcome in his life anymore. Not that I wanted to stay, but when someone spends 8 years telling you that you're worthless, you start to believe it. Jake was quiet for a long moment. He was wrong. He said finally, "You don't know that." "Yes, I do," Jake said with quiet certainty. "I've seen you with the horses, with the cattle. I've watched you work, seen how careful and gentle you are with everything around you. I've seen you laugh and ask questions and get excited about new things. A worthless person doesn't do those things." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks in the darkness. He said I was stupid, that I couldn't do anything right. What do you think? Jake asked. Sarah considered the question seriously. What did she think? For so long, her thoughts had been shaped by Marcus's voice in her head, his constant criticism drowning out any positive assessment of herself. But here, in this peaceful place with this kind man, she found herself remembering who she used to be. I think, she said slowly, I think I used to be someone different. Someone who wasn't afraid all the time. That someone is still in there, Jake said. She just needs some time and space to remember herself. As Sarah lay in bed that night, she found herself thinking about Jake's words. The woman she used to be, before Marcus convinced her she was nothing. Could that person still exist somewhere inside her damaged heart? And if so, was it possible that she might find her way back to herself in this place of wide skies and gentle hands and unconditional kindness? For the first time since she had signed those divorce papers, Sarah allowed herself to hope that the answer might be yes. 3 weeks passed at the ranch, and Sarah found herself falling into a rhythm she had never known existed. She woke each morning to the sound of Jake moving quietly around the kitchen, making coffee, and checking the weather forecast on his phone. She would join him for breakfast, and together they would plan the day's work based on what the cattle needed, what fences required mending, what equipment demanded attention. Sarah discovered she had a natural way with the animals. The horses seemed to sense her gentleness and responded to her touch with calm acceptance. Even the more skittish cattle would approach when she was the one filling their water troughs or checking their feed. Jake noticed this and began asking her opinion about the herd, treating her observations as valuable rather than dismissing them as he might have a city person's amateur comments. "You've got good instincts," he told her one afternoon as they watched a group of calves play in the pasture. "That heifer there, the one you said seemed off yesterday, she's definitely favoring her left front leg." Sarah felt a warm glow of pride at his words. When was the last time someone had told her she was good at something? Marcus had made sure she felt incompetent at everything she touched, but here she was developing skills, learning, growing more confident each day. The physical work was healing her in ways she hadn't expected. Her body, which had been soft and weak from years of hiding indoors, began to strengthen. Her arms developed muscle from lifting feed buckets and hay bales. Her hands, which had been pale and soft, grew callous from handling ropes and tools. For the first time in her life, she felt the satisfaction of physical competence, of knowing her body could be strong and capable rather than just vulnerable. Jake was endlessly patient with her questions. He showed her how to read the weather signs in the clouds and the way the animals behaved. He taught her to drive the tractor, standing behind her with his hands ready to steady the wheel, but never taking control unless she asked for help. He explained the economics of ranching, the careful balance between feed costs and cattle prices, the way weather and market conditions could make or break a year's work. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Sarah asked him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time at the end of each day when they would talk or simply sit in comfortable silence. Jake considered the question seriously. "I guess because you remind me of a horse I had once," he said finally. Sarah frowned. "A horse?" She was a rescue. Previous owner had abused her, broken her spirit. When she first came here, she flinched at every sudden movement, wouldn't let anyone touch her without permission. Took months of patience before she started to trust again. "What happened to her?" Jake smiled. "She became the gentlest, most loyal horse I've ever owned. Once she realized she was safe, that nobody here would hurt her, she blossomed. Lived to be 28, which is old for a horse. Died peacefully in her sleep 3 winters ago." Sarah understood what he wasn't saying directly. She was the horse, damaged and skittish but capable of healing given time and kindness. The comparison should have offended her, but instead it filled her with hope. If a broken horse could learn to trust again, maybe a broken woman could too. The breakthrough came during her 5th week at the ranch. Sarah was working alone in the barn, cleaning stalls and refilling water buckets, when she heard a truck pull into the driveway. Through the open door, she could see a man getting out a dusty pickup. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and an aggressive way of moving that made every nerve in Sarah's body scream danger. Her first instinct was to hide, to make herself invisible until the stranger left. But something made her stay where she was, gripping the pitchfork handle and forcing herself to breathe slowly. She was safe here. Jake was just in the house, and this was probably just a neighbor or a cattle buyer or any of the dozen types of people who had legitimate business at the ranch. The man appeared in the barn doorway, his eyes scanning the interior until they landed on Sarah. "You must be the woman Jake mentioned," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I'm Rick Duffson. I bought the spread next door." Sarah nodded, but didn't move closer. Something about Rick reminded her too much of Marcus. The way his eyes traveled over her body, the way he seemed to be evaluating her like livestock. "Jake around?" Rick asked, stepping into the barn without invitation. "He's in the house," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the alarm bells going off in her head. "Good," Rick said, moving closer. "Been meaning to talk to him about that fence line between our properties. But first, I wanted to meet his new helper." The way he said "helper" made it sound like something dirty. Sarah tightened her grip on the pitchfork, her body coiled and ready to run. "Pretty little thing, aren't you?" Rick continued, ignoring the warning in Sarah's eyes. Jake always was lucky with strays. The word stray hit Sarah like a slap. It was the same tone Marcus had used when he wanted to remind her how worthless she was, how lucky she was that he put up with her. "I'm not a stray," Sarah said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. Rick laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Course you are, sweetheart. Jake told everyone in town how he picked you up off the highway like a lost puppy. Question is, what do you do to earn your keep around here?" The implication in his tone was unmistakable. Sarah felt rage build in her chest, hot and bright and cleaner than any emotion she had felt in years. This man, this stranger, thought he could reduce her to nothing more than her worst fears about herself. "I work," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I take care of the animals. I'm in fences and fix equipment and do whatever needs doing, just like any ranch hand." "Oh, I bet you do," Rick said with a leer. Jake always was a softy for a pretty face in trouble. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah had never been so glad to hear Jake's voice. He stood in the barn doorway, his posture relaxed, but his eyes hard as he looked at Rick. "No problem," Rick said, his tone shifting to false friendliness. "Just getting to know your new hire." "Sarah's not hired help," Jake said mildly. "She's my partner." The word hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. Partner. Not a charity case, not a stray, not someone who was earning her keep through questionable means. A partner. Rick's expression soured. "Partner? That was fast work, Jake. Known her what, a month?" "I know what I need to know," Jake said, his voice carrying a warning that even Rick couldn't miss. "Was there something you needed, or are you just socializing?" Rick's eyes shifted between Jake and Sarah, clearly recalculating his approach. "Want to talk about that fence line, but I can see you're busy. I'll catch you later." After Rick left, Sarah found herself shaking with reaction. The confrontation had brought back every terrible memory of being powerless, of having men look at her like she was something to be used and discarded. "Hey," Jake said softly, approaching her like she was a spooked horse. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, then shook her head, then started to cry. Not the quiet tears she had shed before, but big, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Jake didn't try to touch her or shush her or tell her everything was fine. He just stood nearby, solid and steady until the storm passed. "I'm sorry," Sarah gasped when she could speak again. "For what?" "For being such a mess. For crying. For not being stronger." Jake was quiet for a moment. "You know what I saw just now?" he said finally. "I saw a woman who stood her ground when a bully tried to intimidate her. I saw someone who didn't back down or run away, even when every instinct probably told her to. That takes strength, Sarah. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs doing even when you are scared." That evening, as they sat on the porch, Jake brought up the word he had used in the barn. "I meant what I said about you being my partner." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "But I don't know anything about running a ranch." "You know more than you think. And what you don't know, you can learn." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've been thinking about this place, about what happens to it after I'm gone. I never married, never had kids. Always figured it would just get sold off when I died." "That's a long way off," Sarah said. Jake smiled. "Hope so. But the thing is, this ranch needs someone who loves it, someone who understands that it's not just about making money. It's about the land and the animals and being part of something bigger than yourself. You barely know me. I know you get up before dawn to check on a sick calf. I know you spent 2 hours last week sitting with that mare when she was colicking, just talking to her and keeping her calm. I know you see this place the way I see it." Sarah felt tears threatening again, but these were different tears, warmer ones. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you want to stay. Not as a guest, not as someone I'm helping out a charity, but as my full partner in this operation. We'll split the work and the profits and the decisions. Your name on the deed, your voice in every choice we make." Sarah stared out at the pasture where the cattle were settling in for the night, their dark shapes peaceful against the grass. A month ago, she had been sitting by a highway with $20 and no hope for the future. Now, Jake was offering her half of something beautiful and lasting. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you deserve it," Jake said simply. "Because this place is better with you in it. Because I've watched you bloom here like a flower finally, getting enough sunlight." Sarah thought about Rick's sneering comments, about Marcus's years of telling her she was worthless. Then she thought about the way the horses nickered when they saw her coming, about the satisfaction of a job well done, about falling asleep each night knowing she had contributed something valuable to the world. "Yes," she said, the word coming out stronger than she had expected. "Yes, I want to stay." Jake smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Good. We'll go to town tomorrow and get the paperwork started." That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about the word partner. Not wife, not girlfriend, not dependent. Partner. Someone with agency and authority and responsibility. Someone whose opinion mattered. She thought about the woman who had sat by the highway 5 weeks ago, broken and convinced of her own worthlessness. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who could stand up to bullies and make decisions about her own life. For the first time since she could remember, Sarah fell asleep, not because she was exhausted from surviving another day, but because she was tired from building something beautiful and looking forward to doing it again tomorrow. The lawyer's office in town was small and cluttered, but the papers spread across the desk were crisp and official. Sarah stared at the documents that would make her a legal partner in the Harrison Ranch, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the pen. "This is a significant asset transfer," the lawyer, an elderly man named George Crawford, said to Jake. "You sure you want to do this? You've known Miss Matthews for less than 2 months." Jake's jaw tightened. "I'm sure, George. Just draw up the papers like I asked." Sarah set the pen down without signing. Maybe he's right. Maybe this is too fast. Sarah, Jake said quietly, turning in his chair to face her. Do you want this partnership? She thought about the question seriously. Did she want to tie her future to this place, to this man who had shown her nothing but kindness? Did she want the responsibility that came with ownership, the weight of decisions that would affect not just her, but Jake and the animals and the land itself? Yes, she said finally. Ido. Then sign the papers. As Sarah wrote her name on each document, she felt like she was signing more than a business agreement. She was claiming a place in the world, declaring that she had value and deserved to build something lasting. The paperwork took most of the morning, but by lunch they were walking out of the lawyer's office as equal partners in a 3,000-acre cattle operation. Sarah felt dizzy with the magnitude of it, the way her life had changed so completely in such a short time. Regrets? Jake asked as they climbed into his truck. Terrified, Sarah admitted, but no regrets. The word about their partnership spread through Clearwater faster than Sarah had expected. When they stopped at the hardware store for supplies, Bill clapped Jake on the back and told Sarah she was getting a good man as a partner. At the diner where they ate lunch, the waitress congratulated them like they had just gotten engaged. People are going to talk, Sarah said as they drove home. Let them, Jake replied. Small towns always talk. Give them a few months, and they'll find something new to gossip about. But Sarah could see the speculation in people's eyes, the questions they were too polite to ask directly. Was this a romantic relationship disguised as a business arrangement? What did a city woman really know about ranching? How long before she got tired of the isolation and left Jake holding the bag? The doubts followed Sarah home and settled in her chest like a weight. That evening, as she and Jake planned improvements to the irrigation system, she found herself second-guessing every suggestion she made. What if I'm wrong about the water rights issue? She asked for the third time. Jake set down his pencil and looked at her seriously. Sarah, what's going on? You've been questioning yourself all afternoon. Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. Everyone in town thinks this is crazy. They think you're making a mistake. What do you think? I think maybe they're right. I think maybe I'm in over my head. Jake was quiet for a long moment. You know what I think? I think you're scared, and that's okay. But don't let fear convince you that you're not capable of this. Over the next few weeks, Sarah threw herself into learning every aspect of ranch management. She read books on cattle breeding and pasture rotation. She spent hours online researching feed supplements and vaccination schedules. She called the county extension agent with so many questions that he finally offered to come out for a consultation. The agent, a practical woman named Carol who had been working with ranchers for 20 years, arrived on a crisp October morning. Sarah was nervous about the visit, afraid that her ignorance would be exposed, but Carol proved to be an excellent teacher. You're asking good questions, Carol told Sarah as they walked through the pasture examining the grass quality. Most new ranchers focus on the cattle and forget that everything starts with the land. Sarah felt a glow of pride at the compliment. She had been reading about sustainable grazing practices and had ideas about rotating the herds more frequently to improve soil health. What do you think about dividing this pasture? Sarah asked, pointing to a large field where the cattle had been grazing all summer. If we put in some temporary fencing, we could rest sections while the grass recovers. Carol nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. You'll get better nutrition for the cattle and better long-term health of the land. When Jake joined them for the rest of the consultation, Sarah found herself speaking up confidently about her observations and suggestions. She had been watching the cattle carefully for weeks, noting which areas they prefer to graze and where the grass was getting overgrazed. Sarah's got a good eye for this, Carol told Jake as they finished the tour. She's been asking me questions that show real understanding of the ecosystem here. That evening, Jake raised his coffee cup in a toast. To my partner, who just impressed the hell out of the extension agent. Sarah blushed, but clinked her mug against his. I've been studying. It shows. But more than that, you care about this place. You can't teach that. As autumn deepened into winter, Sarah discovered that Jake had been right about her natural abilities. She found herself noticing things that escaped his attention. A cow that was moving differently, a change in the herd's behavior that might signal weather coming, subtle shifts in the grass that indicated soil problems. The cattle trusted her completely now. Even the most stubborn bulls would move when Sarah asked them to, responding to her calm confidence. She had learned to read their body language, to spot illness before it became serious, to know which ones needed extra attention during feeding time. "You're better with them than I am," Jake told her one snowy morning as they watched Sarah coax a reluctant heifer into the barn for veterinary treatment. "That's not true. It is, and it's not a competition. We each bring different strengths to this partnership." Sarah was learning to accept praise without immediately deflecting it or assuming it was false kindness. Jake didn't say things he didn't mean, and if he said she was good with the cattle, she was learning to believe him. The first real test of their partnership came in November when cattle prices dropped suddenly, due to a trade dispute. Sarah found Jake staring at the computer screen in his office, his face grim as he studied market reports. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough. If we sell now, we'll barely break even on this year's calves." Sarah pulled up a chair next to him and studied the numbers. Her months of reading about ranch economics helped her understand the implications. What are our options? We can sell now and take the loss, or we can feed them through the winter and hope prices recover by spring. What's the risk of waiting? Feed costs will eat into our profits even if prices come back. And if they don't recover, we'll lose even more money. Sarah thought about the problem, weighing factors she was only beginning to understand. What does your gut tell you? That these trade disputes are political theater. They'll get resolved eventually. But eventually might be longer than we can afford to wait. They spend hours going through scenarios, calculating feed costs, and potential market recovery. Sarah suggested calling other ranchers to see what they were planning, reasoning that if everyone held their cattle, the reduced supply might help prices recover faster. "That's smart thinking," Jake said, reaching for his phone. The calls confirmed that most of their neighbors were struggling with the same decision. Some were selling immediately, taking the loss to avoid the risk of bigger losses later. Others were gambling on a recovery. "What if we split the difference?" Sarah suggested. "Sell half now to cover our immediate expenses, keep half, and bet on the recovery." Jake considered the proposal. "That's actually brilliant. We limit our losses either way." They implemented Sarah's plan, and by spring she had been proven right. Prices recovered enough that their held cattle sold for a decent profit, while the early sale had covered their winter expenses. "You saved us," Jake told her as they reviewed the year-end financial statements. "We saved us," Sarah corrected. "That's what partners do." The success gave Sarah confidence to suggest other changes. She convinced Jake to try direct marketing some of their beef to restaurants in Great Falls, cutting out the middleman and getting premium prices for their best animals. She researched organic certification and sustainable practices that might qualify them for specialty markets. "You're turning into quite the businesswoman," Jake observed one evening as Sarah worked on a marketing plan for their direct sales operation. Sarah looked up from her computer, startled by the pride in his voice. "I'm just trying to pull my weight. You're doing a lot more than that. You're making this place better." As winter gave way to spring, Sarah realized she had stopped thinking about her old life almost entirely. The woman who had sat by the highway 8 months ago seemed like a stranger, someone she had read about in a book rather than someone she had been. She still had moments of doubt, times when Marcus's voice echoed in her head, telling her she was fooling herself, that she would eventually mess everything up. But those moments came less frequently now, drowned out by the evidence of her own competence and the steady support of her partner. The community had accepted her too. At the feed store, the clerks asked her opinion about supplement choices. At the diner, other ranchers stopped by her table to discuss market conditions and weather forecasts. She was no longer Jake Harrison's charity case, but Sarah Matthews, rancher in her own right. One evening in March, as they sat on the porch watching the first calves of the season play in the pasture, Jake brought up a subject they had been avoiding. "My sister's coming for a visit next month," he said. "She wants to meet you." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. "What have you told her about me?" "The truth. that you're my partner and the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years. She's going to wonder about us. About whether we're... Sarah trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. Whether we're what? Whether this is really just a business partnership. Jake was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Is that what you wanted to be? Just business. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Sarah had been asking herself the same thing for weeks, noticing the way her heart skipped when Jake smiled at her, the way she found excuses to work beside him, the comfortable intimacy that had developed between them over the long winter evenings. I don't know, she said honestly. I care about you, more than I probably should. But I'm scared. Of what? Of messing this up. Of losing the best thing in my life because I want more than I should. Jake reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Sarah, you're not going to lose me. Whatever happens between us, whatever we decide this is or isn't, you're stuck with me as a partner. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how safe his touch made her feel. Marcus used to say I was unlovable, that no decent man would ever want damaged goods. Marcus was a fool, Jake said quietly, and a liar. Sarah met his eyes, seeing nothing but honesty and affection in their blue-gray depths. For the first time since she could remember, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of love after all. Emma Harrison arrived on a sunny April morning, driving a bright red convertible that looked completely out of place against the backdrop of cattle and rolling hills. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as Jake's sister climbed out of the car, her designer jeans and expensive boots clearly marking her as a city dweller who was visiting the country rather than living it. Sarah had been nervous about this visit for weeks. What would Jake's sister think of the broken woman who had become his business partner? Would she see through Sarah's newfound confidence to the scared, damaged person underneath? She's beautiful, Sarah said as Jake joined her at the window. Emma was tall and blonde, with the kind of effortless elegance that Sarah had never possessed even before Marcus had systematically destroyed her self-worth. She moved with confidence, her head held high as she surveyed the ranch that had once been her home. She's my sister, Jake said simply. Come on, let's go say hello. The introductions were easier than Sarah had expected. Emma's greeting was warm and genuine, her hug enthusiastic despite the fact that they were complete strangers. I've heard so much about you, Emma said, holding Sarah at arm's length to study her face. Jake says you've transformed this place. He's being kind, Sarah replied, her automatic deflection slipping out before she could stop it. Jake's never kind about business, Emma said with a laugh. If he says you've improved the ranch, you have. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself genuinely liking Emma despite her initial reservations. Jake's sister was smart and funny, with a sharp wit and a deep love for her brother that showed in everything she did. She might have chosen city life over ranching, but she understood the value of what Jake had built here. Show me everything, Emma demanded on her second day, and Sarah found herself giving a comprehensive tour of the ranch's operations. She explained the rotation grazing system they had implemented, the direct marketing program they had started, the improvements they had made to the water systems, and fencing. This is impressive, Emma said as they stood in the newly renovated barn, watching the horses in their clean, well-appointed stalls. Jake never bothered with upgrades like this before. Sarah's idea, Jake said, joining them after checking on a cow that was due to calf. She convinced me that comfortable animals are more productive animals. And the financial projections she's put together for the next 5 years. Emma asked. Also her idea? Jake nodded, his expression proud. She's got a head for business that I never had. That evening, after Jake had gone out to check on the pregnant cow, Emma and Sarah sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. So, Emma said, are you in love with my brother? Sarah nearly choked on her wine. That's direct. I believe in cutting to the chase. You two dance around each other like teenagers at a school dance. It's adorable but frustrating to watch. Sarah set down her glass, considering her answer carefully. I care about him, more than I've ever cared about anyone. But it's complicated. How so? Sarah found herself telling Emma about Marcus, about the years of abuse that had left her feeling worthless and unlovable. She spoke about her fears that she was too damaged for a healthy relationship, too broken to deserve someone as good as Jake. Emma listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly angry as Sarah described the systematic way Marcus had destroyed her self-confidence and isolated her from everyone who might have helped her. "That bastard," Emma said when Sarah finished. "He sounds like a textbook abuser. He was, is, probably, with whoever comes after me." "Sarah, look at me," Emma said seriously. "You know that none of what he did to you was your fault, right? And that the person he convinced you that you are doesn't exist. I know that intellectually. But emotionally," Sarah shrugged. "What does Jake see when he looks at you?" Sarah thought about the question. "Someone competent, I think. Someone who can handle responsibility. What else? Someone who cares about the animals and the land." And Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Someone he enjoys spending time with." "Sarah, that man is head over heels in love with you. It's written all over his face every time he looks at you. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Sarah could answer, Jake appeared in the doorway. "Ladies, we have a situation. Bessie's in labor, and it's not going smoothly." The next few hours were a crash course in veterinary medicine as they worked together to help the struggling cow deliver her calf. The presentation was breached, requiring careful manipulation to turn the baby into the proper position. Sarah found herself wrist-deep in the process, following Jake's calm instructions while Emma held the flashlight and offered encouragement. When the calf finally slipped free, wet and steaming in the cold night air, Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face. The baby was breathing, moving, trying to stand on wobbly legs while its mother licked it clean. "Good job, partner," Jake said quietly, his voice warm with pride. They stood together in the barn, covered in mud and blood and exhaustion, watching the new mother tend to her baby. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond the successful delivery. She had been useful in a crisis, competent, and calm when it mattered most. "This is what I love about ranching," Emma said softly. "Being present for these moments when life begins." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, this sense of being part of something larger and more meaningful than herself. The next morning, Emma announced her decision to extend her visit indefinitely. "I've been thinking about coming back anyway," she told them over breakfast. "My job in Denver is fine, but it's not fulfilling. I miss this place, miss being part of something that matters." Sarah felt a moment of panic. Would Emma want to reclaim her place on the ranch? Would there still be room for Sarah if Jake's sister decided to come home? "There's plenty of room for 3 partners," Jake said, as if reading Sarah's thoughts. "If that's what everyone wants." They spent the morning discussing the practical implications of Emma's return. Her business background and connections in Denver could help expand their direct marketing efforts. Her experience with social media and online sales could take their operation to the next level. "I have one condition," Emma said. "You two have got to figure out this romantic tension before it drives me crazy. Either start dating or stop making googly eyes at each other across the breakfast table." Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but Jake just laughed. "Fair enough. Sarah, would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere that isn't the kitchen table." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Like a date. Exactly like a date." "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." Jake took her to a small restaurant in a town 30 miles away, far enough from Clearwater to avoid the inevitable gossip that would follow their first official date. The place was quiet and intimate, with candles on the tables and soft music playing in the background. "I'm nervous," Sarah admitted as they waited for their food to arrive. "Good nervous or bad nervous?" Sarah considered the question. "Good nervous, I think. Like standing on a diving board, scared but excited." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "We don't have to rush anything. We can take this as slow as you need. What if I mess it up? What if I'm too damaged for this?" "Sarah, you're not damaged. You're healed. You're strong and capable and beautiful, and you've become the best partner I could have asked for in business and in life." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and affection. "I love you," she said, the words slipping out before she could second-guess them. "I love you too," Jake replied without hesitation. "I have for months." 6 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony on the ranch, with Emma as maid of honor and half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers from their pasture, and when Jake lifted her veil to kiss her, she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Rick Dawson approached her at the reception, his expression sheepish. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I misjudged you pretty badly that first day." Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine remorse there. "Thank you for saying that. Jake's lucky to have you. This whole operation runs smoother than it ever has." As Sarah danced with her new husband under the Montana stars, she thought about the woman who had sat by the highway 2 years ago, convinced she was worth nothing. That woman had been wrong about so many things, but mostly she had been wrong about her own value. Sarah had discovered that worth wasn't something someone else could give you or take away. It came from within, from the knowledge that you could contribute something meaningful to the world, that you could love and be loved, that you could build something beautiful and lasting. The ranch was thriving under their three-way partnership. Their direct marketing program had expanded to include several restaurants and a farmer's market in Great Falls. They had achieved organic certification for part of their operation, commanding premium prices for their grass-fed beef. Emma's social media marketing had brought customers from across the region. More importantly, Sarah had found her place in the community. She served on the school board and had started a program to bring city kids to the ranch for educational visits. She volunteered at the women's shelter in Great Falls, helping other women who were trying to rebuild their lives after leaving abusive relationships. "You're making a difference," one of the shelter counselors told her after Sarah had spent an afternoon sharing her story with a group of residents. "These women need to see that recovery is possible, that they can build good lives after leaving their abusers." Sarah thought about that conversation as she and Jake worked together in the barn one evening, their movements synchronized after years of partnership. She had never imagined that her own healing journey would become a source of hope for others. But she found deep satisfaction in being able to offer encouragement to women who were where she had once been. "I got a call today," Jake said as they finished feeding the horses, "from that reporter who wanted to do a story about our sustainable practices." "Are we going to do it?" "Only if you want to. It will mean talking about how you came here, about our partnership." Sarah considered the proposal. 2 years ago, the thought of strangers knowing her story would have terrified her. Now she saw it as an opportunity to reach other women who might be sitting by their own highways, convinced they were worth nothing. "Let's do it," she said. "Maybe someone needs to hear that it's possible to start over, to build something beautiful from the pieces of a broken life." As they walked hand in hand back to the house, Sarah marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She had traveled from worthlessness to partnership, from isolation to community, from despair to hope. Most importantly, she had learned that worth wasn't something you lost when someone hurt you, and it wasn't something you found when someone rescued you. Worth was something you recognized in yourself when you finally stopped listening to the voices that told you that you were nothing and started paying attention to the evidence of your own capabilities, your own contributions, your own capacity to love and be loved. Jake stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, kissing her under the same stars that had witnessed her first night of real safety on the ranch. Sarah kissed him back, her heart full of gratitude for the man who had seen her worth before she could see it herself, but who had waited patiently while she learned to value herself. In the distance, the cattle settled in for the night, their presence a reminder of the life they had built together, the partnership that had grown from business arrangement to love story to something even deeper and more lasting. Sarah had learned that sometimes the most broken people don't need rescuing. They just need someone to believe in their capacity to heal themselves and a safe place to do the hard work of remembering who they really are. The woman by the highway had whispered that she was worth nothing, but she had been wrong. She had been worth everything. She had just needed time and space and love to remember it.